Welcome to episode 171 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement who make it so great. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Amazon Business. With the value and convenience of Amazon, plus innovative tools and features, purchasing leaders and credit unions can reduce costs, save time, maintain control, and efficiently scale operations. Amazon Business, the most comprehensive one-stop for business purchasing. Today, I get to have a conversation with Keith O'Neill. Keith is the president and CEO of Johns Hopkins FCU in Maryland. Let's just jump right in. I'm excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited also.
I've been looking forward to this. For the folks out there who don't know you, how about just some a little bit of background? Where did your career start? I know you've been in credit unions for a long time, but what was that path to get you to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, my parents have been involved with credit unions from early on when they came to this country. So I really feel like that gift of credit unions came to me through them. And then I got involved with my student credit union at college, and that was a pretty impressive experience and really got me into understanding and appreciating what a credit union can do. So had a really fantastic economics professor that just kind of launched my my time and my energy. And then from there, like they say, it's history, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. The late John Pembroke from CUIs also got involved with the credit union in college. I remember him when he was on the show talking about that. I do have to ask, I'm a traveler, so I'd love to know where are your parents from?
From Guyana in South America.
No kidding. That's a country I've not been to yet. So that's awesome. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about your decision to become the CEO at JHFCU. And on the flip side, when you kind of think back to that, any top of mind tips that you might have for that person who's sitting in your shoes a few years back who was like, I'd like to be a CEO someday? Any thoughts you'd share with them?
Yeah, I really think it's a partnership on a lot of levels, because what I think I missed along the way is that the board and the CEO really need to get to a partnership, and any efforts to try to present something that's not who you are in that initial interview and in those initial discussions, I think that can really set you up for a bad experience. So if I were going to say it all again, and it's really hard to do because when you want to become a CEO, you just want to get the next opportunity. But realistically, it's a matter of you also interviewing and understanding and making sure you present yourself in the way that's going to be true to yourself so that you can perform as closely to how you want to operate as possible. That sounds like a lot, but I really think it's that relationship, even from the very get-go. It's the transparency in the relationship between the board and the CEO.
I've heard Jill, obviously, the people business is a big conversation in our house. And I've heard her talk to potential candidates for CEO jobs over the last few years where she's like, you're interviewing the board too. We know everybody, you want to be the CEO, but you want to make sure it's the right fit for you as well, right? Not just the board. So I'd like to expand on that a little bit. Over the years, as I've had some friends become CEOs, even if they were in those senior leadership positions beforehand, but the first time CEO, I'm thinking of one person in particular, and she was talking about she didn't realize how, even though she was in the board meetings often, but how much she was actually shielded from that board relationship by her previous CEO. So I'd ask you, is there something like looking back, you're like, ooh, I wish I would have known that when you first stepped in and you are the CEO? Because it's such an interesting position, right? You have your whole team, and then all of a sudden you have now 9, 10, however many bosses above you too, right? In that relationship with the board chair. Any tips for maybe that person who hasn't been in that position or that just started here in the past, say, couple of weeks or month?
Well, I'll say that one of the best things that I did is I got myself a mentor early on. I have a CEO that I work with from across the country. I've known him for about 15, 20, almost 20 years now. When I got the position, the first thing I went out and I did is I said, hey, can we set up a few months of meetings just so I can navigate this initial, how the board's going to operate, how I should step into this credit union space. I just really loved having that mentorship, because he was able to really help me. And I won't say I made a ton of mistakes, but there are definitely things that you learn along the way and nuances and things that you want to ask about that you wouldn't really think about from a detail standpoint, but are absolutely critical to managing that relationship. So I think having a mentor, someone who's been there, done that, someone who has some alignment with your values is really critical. And frankly, I let my board know that also, that I have mentors and people that I look to help me along this path.
Oh, absolutely. We all need to have those. I want to skip ahead now a little bit, and then I'm going to circle back. But to keep going down that kind of rabbit hole of mentors, that's something I always love to ask about. Is this somebody, you mentioned that you've known for 20 years. Was that somebody that you seeked out? Or, how did that relationship come where you were able to build that mentor and, others, people that you bounce stuff off to? How have you created the Keith network that you have to talk to?
That's interesting when you say the Keith network, because there's so many relationships that I've built along the way, so many vulnerabilities, I guess, that I've been able to expose, problems that I've created, things that I've helped to solve, where you start to meet people and understand challenges. But this particular mentor, and I've had a number of them, but this particular mentor came from a management course that I took, a week-long credit union management course that I took a number of years back. And I really admired the way that he interacted with the folks in the class and the way that he spoke about leadership generally. So over the years, I'm a big LinkedIn guy. So over the years, I just like to track him and see what's going on and try to get a feel for, what his organization looked like over time. And we're not the same person, but I will say I admire someone who has a vision and has a way about doing things. And I like to emulate those types of folks. We're not going the same place, but at least I understand what it means to execute a vision.
Do you have that person? Oftentimes people will just tell us that they think like you share an idea, a thought. They're like, that's great. You're the smartest guy out there, right? Like, do you have that person or those people around you who are like, what are you thinking? That kind of like speak truth to power, right?
Yeah. those are the only good mentors, I'd say. The ones who are gonna humble you when you think you've got it all figured out, and they say, well, let me talk to you a little bit about that, because that might not be the direction to go. Now, I appreciate people who challenge me, because those are the folks who help you grow. And I've had some people who just speak the truth, like you said, and deliver that hard message when necessary, but also support you when necessary and move you or nudge you in certain directions. So I've got a good healthy balance of that humility, I'll say.
One last question on this. The folks, when you're thinking of these people, are they all in credit unions? Do you have people outside of credit unions?
It's all across the board. I feel like my first mentor came to me in middle school, and I look back on it now, and I didn't realize there was a mentorship at that point, but I worked in this little basket shop back in my hometown, and there was a retired, I think he was a chemistry teacher, but we spent a lot of time just cleaning his shop and delivering baskets, and I went sailing with him and learned all sorts of experiences. But when I finally looked back on that, numbers of years later, I realized that there was a mentorship that was going on, and he was helping to develop me and develop skills and develop thought processes. He challenged me in terms of what I wanted to do academically. So I actually sent him this book. I don't know if you've heard of Tuesdays with Maury.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I finally figured out that was a mentorship, and I really appreciated him for it, I went back and I sent that book to him just to kind of acknowledge our relationship.
Oh, that's fantastic. Right. I'm a guy who grew up in Detroit. So Mitch Albom was like the sports reporter for, my whole childhood. So yeah, I've read his books. But where'd you grow up?
Well, it's a hamlet of Wappingers Falls called Hughesonville, New York. And it was just outside of New York, north of New York in the Poughkeepsie, Hudson Valley area.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about credit unions. I kind of skipped ahead because I was so intrigued by the mentoring relationship, which I think I know from feedback on the show, that's one of those things people really like to hear about. But credit unions, biggest challenges you see if you like kind of take that step back, like blimp level. What's the biggest challenges we as a movement are facing today?
I can't say as a movement. I can speak, I guess, on some levels for my organization, and not just this organization, but I guess my size is finding our niche, finding where we fit within this entire economy, essentially, because products are becoming more and more commoditized. So the types of products that are being delivered, it's easy to get things in different places, but there's a level of interaction with our members and a level of engagement that I believe is really necessary. And finding that balance is something that's going to be unique for the future. And of course, everyone talks about consolidation, but I do believe in smaller credit unions in the sense that, everyone has their niche in a way. And as long as you are responsible and understand how to plan for, those good times and bad times, and making sure that you have the succession planning that's necessary, I think that there can be a lot of really good partnerships there that can help, well into the future. So.
What you said about succession planning, I think is so true and so important. I feel like over the past few years, we've seen way too much succession planning by merger.
Yes.
Right? Like so maybe I just like a lot of credit unions, but let me ask you on the flip side of this, and I think you're starting to get into it. So I'd like to go a little deeper on that. Like what has you excited for the opportunities, not only at your credit union, but, nationally as well, when you look forward?
I think that people are finally understanding that relationship building, financial coaching and counseling is critical. People have long been uncomfortable about money. No one likes to have conversations about money because they assume that everyone else next to them has more of it and that they're not struggling with anything. And, they're the ones who are in the bad situation. And I think just having some transparency around your finances is really critical. And if you can trust someone at your credit union in particular to begin speaking about what's going on for you and what your goals and your dreams and desires are. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but I think at the core, we all want to have those conversations so that we can sleep at night, so that we can feel comfortable, so that we can know that the things that we want to take care of in the future are going to come our way, because that's the core of who we are as people, I believe.
I couldn't agree with you more. Kind of a follow-up on that, what we were talking about earlier in your career path, this just popped into my head when I was doing a little bit of research for the show. I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but did you kind of come up through the credit union on the IT path originally?
I did. I spent a lot of time, I guess it was probably in the 90s, there was a lot of technology happening. And as much as I was pursuing my passion, I really also needed to look at paying the bills. And technology was really the path to be able to do that. And I feel really lucky, frankly, because now when you take a look at where the industry is and where the movement is, technology is such a driver. And just having a fundamental understanding of what's going on there, I think, is critical for the future.
I couldn't agree more. The question that I have on this is, you and I both, coming up through, normally the CEO came from some sort of finance or lending path. I've noticed over the years, some of my marketing friends, that path has now, and to see that technology side also, if there's an IT person out there, they want to expand their career outside of the IT or outside the tech department. Any suggestions, recommendations that you would give them? Because my guess is there had to be a time, I know it happens with marketers, I've heard it from other friends that started in IT, where they're like, oh, but you don't have your finance chops yet. And I'm doing air quotes, right? And it's like, well, no, I've worked at a credit union. I do. I guess, if you're running into that roadblock, or there's a person out there who's listening who is, anything that you think back on that was helpful for you?
Yeah, I think having a broad exposure is really critical. So yes, I do think you have to have your finance chops. Do you have to be a CFO? Not necessarily, but do you need to speak the language and understand the nuances and the details as you're solving problems? Yeah, and when folks are bringing solutions to you, you need to understand that. But what I've taken is there's really two pieces that I try to coach also, is people and execution. And realistically, any leader that I've really admired has been good at those two things, in the sense that you want to find someone who can get things done, regardless of what the discipline is or the function that's happening. You want someone that's going to assess the situation, that's going to manage the risk associated with it, and is going to be able to move that across the finish line. Right? And I think that anyone at a high level, that's what they're looking for. They want to get things done. They want to move ahead and accomplish their goals. And then if they find someone who can do that, then boom, you've got it. The other aspect is people. And I think for technology folks also in particular, I think it's really, really critical to spend time understanding people, building empathy, really just making that a study. I can't say enough about that people side. And I really believe, what you might see in the near future is a pivot towards HR executives that end up migrating into these critical roles. Because when you think about the impact that people have on an organization, why wouldn't I put a leader in place that's going to help drive that business?
Yeah, the people operations side of the biz. So let me ask you this. Obviously, when you're in the technology side of things, many times the people isn't the focus necessarily. It may be the people that's invisible on the other side of what you're doing. But, was that something that you always had? Did you always have that balance? Was it something that you went out and developed in yourself through training, or just being more conscious of it, I guess? Or was it just something that was natural for you?
I've naturally been a people person on a lot of levels. I don't want to pretend that I was perfect with it. I didn't have my trip ups along the way and learned a lot of hard lessons along the way in terms of relationships. But you mentioned something about, people, the invisible people on the front end. And I've really rejected that from the early days of my technology. And I wanted to understand what the end user's experience was like and how are they responding and reacting to the things that we're doing. How do I help them get their jobs better? And I think when I grew up in IT, it was very much a black box. And, we really needed to expand beyond that. And I think early on also in my career, I started hiring people into the technology area that weren't IT people. They were from the credit union broadly, because I figured I can train you on all the technology pieces, but I need you to understand how to interact with people and how to get, the business needs from individuals and to speak that conversation. So that's been an early piece for me.
Just in the time that you and I have both been in credit unions, that merging of technology and marketing and member facing, we're still facing the member if they're on our online experience, right? So yeah, that's been a fascinating, exciting time to watch, right? So
it's moving fast.
It does move fast, that's for sure. One of the things I love about this podcast is I get to just pick people's brains, and sometimes they're just like scratch my own itch questions. And this was a question that I heard on a podcast last year, and I absolutely loved it. And the question was, what's the greatest investment that you've made in your career? And to give you an example, and I've said this on the show, like Warren Buffett said it was Dale Carnegie courses.
That's a tough one because there have been a lot of really good investments, but I really have to go back to mentorship because I think a lot of folks don't feel like they have the time or they don't feel comfortable or vulnerable enough to have a real relationship. So making sure that I took the time, whether it's something that I engaged with off hours or whether I take the time out of my day, it's such a huge aspect of moving my career forward. And this is going back years that I felt this way. And I think that's it. I'd love to say that I had a quote or a book or something or a class. And I loved a lot of classes along the way, but the mentors that I've had along the way, the true mentors, have been pretty powerful for me. So I guess bringing that back around is it's taking the time for what you need to be working on, right? So whether it's training, whether it's mentorship, it's just, that investment is going to be beyond valuable.
Now that you've got the big desk, is that something that, if people were reaching out to you that you're making the time for as well? Or
Absolutely. I do. I try to do that as much as I can. I mentor, and I've been doing this for a couple of years through the AACUC, the African American Credit Union Coalition. I've had folks within the organization or prior organizations that I've worked with. So, you obviously have to balance your time, but sometimes it's a matter of connecting people with another mentor.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have the time available, then you've got to find some connection that can help them out.
I think that's something that's so important that you just said. Like when you think back on the mentor that you've had for years, there was obviously a personal connection that allowed it to go on that long, right? Like it wasn't just okay, we talked a couple times, that has continued. And you mentioning AACUC, I have to always give a shout out to Renee. She's one of my favorites, been on the show a few times. So God, love me some Renee. A question about building that leadership team and the folks that you have around you to really, build the credit union. We talk about culture a lot, but when you take it all the way back to the beginning, when you're bringing somebody on board, is there something that you're looking for or a characteristic that you're looking for in folks that plays into that decision-making process?
Oh, man. Not one characteristic. I'd say, I definitely want someone to have passion because I'm an extremely passionate person about the credit union movement and about, this financial inclusion that we pursue. So they need to have passion about something. I can sell you on the credit union movement. I just need to know that you have passion about something. You can't just be existing. But I think, a lot of folks talk about teamwork, and I look at teamwork more as empathy in the sense that you understand how to engage with other individuals, that you can see those other people through their eyes almost and be able to build relationships in that way. I think that's really critical. And then the other piece that I'd say is vulnerability. And when I get into a room with my executive team, I expect us to be able to just be able to feel vulnerable, to say what's on our minds, to challenge what's going on. And we need to get to the point where we feel comfortable in that space so that we can accept feedback, but we also need to be able to deliver it. So
Okay, I have a new question. Often I absolutely love what you just said there. So often it almost at this point sounds cliche to hear like a CEO say, well, I have an open door policy. But we've all worked for people that may say that you're like, oh no, that is not true. You mentioned, so you as the CEO, you come on board. How were you vulnerable? How did maybe you create that space where they're like, okay, a couple of years back where they're like, we don't know this, Keith, that they felt comfortable having those conversations as a group and truly having those. Is there anything you can, any thoughts on, I guess, building that trust with your leadership team?
I think it is sharing on some levels. It's being candid with questions. There was one question all employee meeting we had one question that came out that said, hey, are you going to be expanding our hours once you've come on? We've had these hours and we want to know, are you going to expand those hours? And I just very flatly said, I don't have any intentions of doing that at this point. But if the members demand that we move in that direction, then we're going to have to take a look at that. So what ended up happening, it was almost viral across the organization that Keith is going to expand hours. And there were pitchforks coming at my door and emails coming through. So I went back into that conversation with the all employees again. And I said, there's a responsibility when I'm being vulnerable, when I'm sharing information with you, when I'm being transparent with you, you have to take that information and you have to honor it. You can't do something with it that it's not intended to do. So I think there's a responsibility on both ends, and there's a teaching that has to occur, through each example. So, and the reason why I led you down that path is because, you get these questions of how do you build culture, or how do you build a team? How do you do all of these pieces? And I really think it's hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month. There's no one thing that seems to do it, but every moment is a teaching moment where you can be vulnerable. You can say, wow, that was an overwhelming experience. Let me tell you how that made me feel. Now let's talk about your accountability and how you deal with that information, because in order for me to be vulnerable, you have to protect my vulnerability, right? That's part of the deal.
I've asked that question quite a few times over the years, and that might be one of my favorite answers there. So well done. That was cool. I think people are going to dig that. To take a couple steps back, adding somebody to the leadership team, going through the interview process, is there something that's just an absolute no-go where you're like, you will not fit here?
I'm not answering questions. That is just, I don't like fluffy answers. It's not that I don't want you to really spell out what your thoughts are and your vision is, but if I ask questions or go into a level of depth and I choose to go in that direction, I just expect an answer that leads me towards what I'm looking for. And really what that points back to me is this transparency thing, because whether I like your answer or not, I just want you to give an answer. I want you to be upfront with me about what your perspective is, because that's going to help me understand your thought process. So I'd say not answering questions is probably a huge pet peeve of mine, and will probably pretty much just make me say, it's a no-go. I need some more transparency than this.
I love that. So now that you have your team, how do you give feedback? Is there a style? Do people know what to expect from you?
So we have weekly touch bases across the organization. We sit down for 20 minutes to a half an hour each week with each managers are having with their individual employees. So we're working through successes. I like to start out with successes because we tend to miss those quite a bit, and then we move into discussing challenges. So they're either challenges that you need my help with, or they're challenges that they have solved or they have a direction on, and they just want to let me know. And we're very clear about that. And then just outlining what the future holds. So what does the next week or 2 weeks look like for that individual? But I think in the challenges is where some of those conversations come into play, when we're discussing the challenges and how we got there, and leading people through that path. That's really interesting, because I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of questions, and I can definitely ask questions that'll help us drive in that direction. But then beyond that, we also have, we call them action plans, and action plans are done to help establish not just development items, but wherever you want to improve. Everyone needs to have some type of action plan, so you're always working on something. You're trying to move ahead. And then through those action plans, there just needs to be candid conversations. And I do believe that in my executive team and beyond, that people are very aware that I'm going to say what's on my mind. I'm not a yeller or anything along those lines, but when you walk into my office, you're gonna get a straight answer if that's what you need.
There's going to be no guessing, which is I appreciate that. So this was a question that I added back because I was really interested to ask you this. Probably a scratch my own itch on this one because it's something I've struggled with over my career. But I was thinking of again, going from that tech side to the CEO chair. Whether it's credit unions, whether it's CUInsight as a small business, we have limited resources. We also have great ideas that we think are going to work, and maybe they're not working. Right? How do you kill the project? How do you make sure, like to reuse those resources, time, energy, money, all of that, in something that's more productive, even if you're just like, this should work, but it's not. We all have that, right? Any tips on that? I tend to stick with my great ideas a long time, longer than I should a lot of the time. So
no, it's really hard. I think I struggle with that. Everyone struggles with that, even in terms of managing people. Sometimes you stick with something too long before you really correct an issue. But, I call it my batting average because if you take a look at sports, and I forget who said this, I think there was a basketball player recently who said, look, just because I didn't win the championship doesn't mean that, I wasn't successful for the entire year because, you're constantly building. And the idea is that you want to have more wins than not, right? And you want to continue to improve and continue to challenge. So, I talked to my board about that in the sense that I'm going to bring things to them, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm going to let them know where the failures are, but I'm going to try to provide direction, right? And I'm in control of this. I knew what happened and where we need to go next. And again, I'm trying to maintain that batting average. As long as I'm maintaining a strong batting average, then we should be okay.
You got a Hall of Fame career, right?
So that's what I try to promote in the organization also is, we need to acknowledge when something isn't quite right or quite working, and then get feedback, because if you're trying to make that decision in a vacuum without your peers and without bouncing it off of a mentor or a partner or someone, it's really challenging to move forward.
This next question I added for you, and it honestly came this morning when I did a little Google homework and I saw a picture of you, and I think like a Baltimore Business Journal of some sort or whatever, but it was the picture and it had like the words, I think, service behind it.
Yes.
But the E was for empowerment. And that stuck out to me. And I made this question just for you. First time I may add it to other people because I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear this answer. But you run a cooperative financial institution. It's community based. What does the word empowerment mean for you internally at the credit union and externally in the community that you serve?
Man, that's deep. I think I'll start with the member side because it is a cooperative. And when you talk about empowerment for members, it's providing tools, it's providing resources, it's providing clarity in terms of the services that they're getting. And whether it's services with us or anywhere else, it's a matter of just having open, honest conversations so that they have tools available to them to make the best decision for their lives. And I do believe that having honest conversations with them is equally as important as providing the tools and education. And that's why I believe so much in coaching, because you can develop that relationship and then you can level set and make sure that you're on the same page. From an employee standpoint, that one is a lot broader for me in a lot of ways, because there's also this accountability piece of empowerment, and that's accepting responsibility for, the things that are happening in your environment. And it's, as much as I may want to provide tools and I want to provide experiences and things, I think employees also need to engage themselves and need to continue to be invested in, where are the opportunities that they have? Because when you are vulnerable and you are gaining those opportunities, that's where growth comes, and that's where empowerment comes, and that's where, frankly, control. My mom used to talk about having a choice, and when you have all of these opportunities and you've made yourself vulnerable, then you just have more choices, which definitely gets you to that next level.
Absolutely. It's been interesting over the past few years. You and I grew up in credit unions. The idea of remote work was always that would never happen. And then, things changed. And I mean, there's whatever that happens to be at this point.
From a remote work standpoint, I've thought about remote work for a long time because I did grow up on the IT side. So when I take a look at remote work, it wasn't something that was foreign to me. I think it was more a matter of how do you change your business processes to enable remote work. Early on, I did consulting with credit unions, so we were on the road all the time. So, there's always an opportunity to work remotely because as a consultant, you did your work on site and then you did your work in the evening for the other credit unions, right? So, it was just this constant remote engagement. But I think the biggest challenge is really engagement. It's figuring out how to engage in a remote way.
If you were, I don't know, looking at, say, maybe someone graduating from high school, graduating from college right now, what does a career in credit unions look like to you down the road?
Oh, wow. I didn't see that one coming at all. We've been pursuing apprenticeships with some of the local community colleges and working with internships within the obviously Johns Hopkins, trying to work with students in those environments. And I think that that's an interesting opportunity for folks to get involved in credit unions. And then the thing that I love here in Maryland, we have a really strong young professionals network. And they do some amazing events. And I think having that energy and engagement is really, really pretty critical. You need to engage with people. I really believe before you can really fully do remote work, for instance, that you need to have some empathy and you need to engage with your teammates and build that skill set. And what I don't know yet is how to do that in a remote environment when you really have no experience in the workforce. That's the biggest challenge, because it's not until you get out there that you start to realize, oh, the world's a little different than what I experienced in school.
Right. Absolutely. That's something we've struggled with here. Even, I mean, we've been remote for a long time, but bringing in the person who doesn't necessarily have that office experience tends to kind of be a struggle sometimes. So we haven't figured that out either.
Yeah. My son was looking at playing soccer in college. The two of them have, one that's already played, the other one's looking at playing. And one of the questions that the coach was asking about is, about his brothers, because we have 4 kids and there's four brothers. And I think, and I can only read into this question, but one of the things I believe he wanted to understand is how would you fit in with the team? How would you deal with the team dynamics? Because, if you didn't have siblings, what other scenario were you in that you created that? Did you have other teams or other engagement that would give you the skill sets necessary to know when to battle, when not, when to cry for mercy, whatever it may be? Right. You have to have some level of balance. And I think the workforce is no different, but you obviously have to learn a different level or a different type of engagement, but you need that personal interaction.
Absolutely. Yep. That is for sure. Before we have a little fun with the rapid fire questions, was there anything you were hoping that I was going to ask you today that I skipped over and you were like, hey, you didn't ask me about this?
Yeah, I'm looking at, no, I don't think so. I've enjoyed the pieces that we've discussed. I guess the only piece that I would bring around is really discussing mental health. That's really been a big part or a big aspect for me. And coming into this organization, I was very vulnerable with everyone just based upon my concerns and things that have happened for me over the years, and wanting to make sure that we create platforms to allow people to have conversations about what they're coming into work with, because it doesn't matter. You can try to keep everything out the door, right? But it really all trickles in some fashion. And being able to be open and honest and deal with mental health issues is, I think, critical. We can't solve them all, but not having to hide them is really important. I think the other aspect in financial institutions is, and it's along the same lines, is financial health, because I think that what the industry has created generally is this dynamic where we're uncomfortable talking about our own finances and the struggles that we may have, right? So it's a lot of pressure to want to keep your job and take care of your family, and also be struggling to pay your bills and to do the basics, and I believe that that's really important for us to just put on the table and have open, honest conversations with. So, financial health, mental health, all of those pieces are really critical.
I'll have to connect you with Robbie Young at CUInsight. Her DE project is on mental health. It's something that outside of, work, she's a huge advocate, volunteer effort, all of that. But she's like, when she went through DE, she was like, whoa, there's a direct tie that should be done here that we could be talking about at credit unions as well. And so she started to share a lot of resources, but you guys would, I'm sure, hit it off well, So, okay, now it wouldn't be the CUInsight experience without the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So what was the first job you ever had?
The basket shop that I described. I was cleaning floors and moving baskets around and picking flowers and doing everything that nobody else wanted to do.
How old were you then? Is that like high school or?
It was middle school. It was early on, and I was just up the street from my house.
This is perfect. I love it. When was the last time, either personally or professionally, you found yourself being amazed? Like, that's amazing.
Oh, man. Oof. This is great, actually, because there's 2 examples that I've been talking about a ton recently. We have an intern here at our organization right now, and She came to me at the annual meeting. She had a mentor, no less, right? A mentor that pushed her into this annual meeting and said, hey, we might be able to meet the new CEO. And I really think the mentor was really setting her up, but pushed her into this scenario and said, oh, check it out. There's the new CEO. You should go and meet this person, right? So I really admired her stepping into that situation and shaking my hand and engaging with me, and the way she followed up. I was just really impressed. And I think that that's a level of risk taking that I'm just absolutely amazed with. And I think that more people need to do that and need to get comfortable in that space. And the second one, very similar situation. My son went in to talk. They had a new president at his university, and he's a senior, and he went in to talk to the president and said, hey, I'd like to chat with you, find out what your journey is like, and maybe I can do a senior project on you. And one thing led to another, and now all of a sudden he's doing additional work with this individual. And I think it's a phenomenal experience when you put yourself out like that. It's just, you said amazing. Those two stories right there amaze me because they've taken risks, and I think that taking that kind of risk is really important early on in life.
As someone my nature is to be more introverted, even though I don't play one on the podcast, both of those amaze me too. So anything, you're currently working on about yourself, what's taking up that personal growth space for Keith?
Oh, wow. I'm taking a break from personal growth. How's that?
Nice. I like it. We need those spaces, right? Like you can't just constantly.
Yeah, no, I really mean that. I had a conversation with my mentor and a few other people where, folks were trying to get me to work on myself and continue to develop. And I had gotten to a point where there was just too much happening for me and I needed to take a little bit of a break. And it's not that I took a break from those individuals. We just took a break from working on me. And I think that's something that I'm working at now is learning how to balance that. When do I need to work on me? Because I can criticize myself with the best of them, right? But knowing when to take a break from that and allowing yourself to grow, it's kind of like muscles, right? You go work out, but you need some rest time in order to get to that next level.
You need the recovery, right?
Exactly.
So you mentioned the 4 kids. One of the things that I've noticed, and I think we've all kind of seen this, is sometimes as you're, let's say, rising up in your career, you get to that CEO spot. The family that balance can kind of get out of whack. Any hacks for the new CEO about keeping the life balanced?
I wish I had a hack. I think it's a journey. It's like anything else that you're working through and that you care about. You're not going to do it right all the time. But you need to be willing to continue working on it and changing things. And when you mess things up, you've got to come back at it and acknowledge, even with my kids, when I've messed something up, I try to let them know this is how I made my decision. But you know what? It just didn't really work out the way I expected it to. But I will say throughout my whole career, my wife has been a stabilizing influence there. So I have to say she's not going to let me get too far aside from what's critical. And it's not that I don't focus on my family, but like you said, when you get into some of these positions, they can be really stressful and you tend to lose focus, and having other people around you that help to create that focus is absolutely critical.
No, that's good stuff. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And do you remember who gave it to you?
Yeah, I use it all the time. Have a choice. That was from my mom. And she said it in her Guyanese accent also. Have a choice. She said that from early on, and I learned more and more what it meant. But, whatever it is that you do, you need to make sure that you're stepping into it so that you have as many choices in front of you as possible. Yeah. So you don't want to limit yourself in the way that you want to grow. You want to give yourself the foundations, the platforms to make sure that you can make decisions. Otherwise, you're locked into certain situations, and it's a little bit more challenging.
Smart mom. What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can still listen to front to back.
I don't have a greatest album. I love music. I love all sorts of music. I'll tell you the one song is from Eminem, and it's "Lose Yourself," and I listen to that.
It's your hype song?
It absolutely is my hype song. So I'm not going to say that that's the best album of all time, but more recently, I've anytime I go into an interview or a talk or anything like that, I usually play "Lose Yourself," and that gives me some energy. But no, I love music. I absolutely love music. I don't have one particular type of music that I get into, so couldn't give you that one.
Anything you're currently reading or like that book that you would recommend or you just think everybody should read?
I just finished the Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver. Okay. And it's not a business book. It just is enlightening. And in the recent times that we've had, the political, social environment that's been out there, it's really interesting to read something like that and just get some perspective on the impact or the assumptions that people make about others, and what impact that has over time. So that's been an interesting book for me, and I think my wife had recommended it.
I was just going to say, I know I haven't read it, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, I feel like that's in our house. I bet Jill's read it. So
yeah, no, it's a really good one. So I've enjoyed that one. So yeah, not a business book, but I think it gives you empathy and an appreciation for how the impact that you have on other people.
I like it. So when you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
The word success and the first person. How about you? Is that you're doing what you want to do? And I have a lot of different people that I look at. I think I'd have to say my mom, and I guess the reason why I would say that is she had an opportunity to explore a lot of what she was interested in. She was very much interested in going to school and studying people and psychology. She was an artist, and she was commissioned to do a number of pieces for folks in her area. She did pottery. She opened up a business. She traveled. So, I consider that to be success because she found herself. And when she wanted to try something and do something, she went ahead and did it until she mastered it and then moved on.
That is absolutely amazing. And it's a great way to wrap up this show. Any final thoughts you'd like to share? Or do you have any asks of our listeners?
I don't in particular, but it's just going to be back to that mental health piece is making sure that we create a platform for mental health and acknowledging that, what people bring to work and deal with at home every day.
I absolutely love that. I would ask of you if there are any resources you would love to share, please shoot them over because we'll list those in the show notes as well. I'll talk to Robbie to see if there's one she recommends that we could share as well. And everything else we talked about today, we'll link to in the show notes. Last quick question. You mentioned LinkedIn and that you like to be on there. If people have more questions of you, what's your poison? Best way to get a hold of you?
Like I said, I do love LinkedIn and I can engage from that standpoint. So I'd be happy to leave my contact information in there and you can reach out to me.
We will do that for sure. Again, thank you so much for being here today. This has just been a blast. I've absolutely enjoyed it. So thanks for being here, my friend.
I enjoyed it also. Thank you.
Just a few things before we go. Make sure to check out our sponsor, Amazon Business, the most comprehensive one-stop shop for business purchasing. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience podcast on all your favorite podcast players. We're on all of them. So Apple, Spotify, whatever your poison is on that. And if you're looking for a book mentioned, like the one Keith mentioned today, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read can be on its way from our sponsors, Amazon. That's awesome that those two are the same now. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Be well, my friends.